Hi, welcome back to Getting Open with me, Andrea Miller. Today's episode is one that goes so far and so deep on relationships, from the 3 genuinely easy, straightforward things you need to do to be a great dad, to actionable insights on parasocial relationships, whether you have a relationship with Jesus Christ or Taylor Swift. The benefits and drawbacks are there. And then, oh my gosh, touching on infidelity. Are we meant to be monogamous for life as a species? And honestly, we then get into so much amazing cutting edge brain science that ties it all together. These insights blew me away. I'm excited to share them with you. So let's get into it. Dr. Andrea Machin is a pioneer of fatherhood science and is unique in her approach to the study of human love, combining studies, techniques, and explanations from both the biological and social sciences. Anna spent over 12 years at the University of Oxford, focusing in particular on fatherhood and the genetics and neurobiology of love. She has written 2 popular science books, Life of Dad and Why We Love, and is the presenter of the How We Are Wired podcast. Anna is passionate about public engagement in science and is currently working with the team to explore the impact of AI on the future of love. Anna, welcome to Getting Open.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited. Okay, I want to start with fatherhood. I think it is fascinating that you're a pioneer in the space. So you argue that human fatherhood is an evolutionary rarity, that humans are among the few mammals in which fathers invest substantially in offspring, that fathering is biologically and psychologically meaningful, not only socially constructed. What is the number one thing we should know about fatherhood, and what is the number one thing people get wrong?
Oh, wow. I think the number one thing you should probably know about fatherhood is they are absolutely vital to child development. I think that's the number one thing you should know. And
all right, I'm going to come back to that because I want to ask you about deadbeat dads.
Oh, go on then. I hate that term, but go on. Go.
Okay. So and then we'll get to the number one thing people get wrong. Okay. How bad is it? I mean, it's like if you were uninitiated and you looked at the news, you would think deadbeat dads are the norm. Intuitively, that doesn't seem like it's the case. How bad is the deadbeat dad problem?
It really isn't the case. I think the problem is lots of people conflate a father who's not co-resident, so somebody who's gone through a divorce or a separation or whatever, and an absent or deadbeat dad who's not in their child's life. And actually, just because you don't live with your children doesn't necessarily mean that you're not in their lives. And recently there was quite a wide-ranging study done in the UK on a very large cohort of children. And it was found that, 84% of children of divorced families see their father at least once a week. So it's something that the media latch onto, certain political sectors latch onto as being a thing, but it's not actually that big a phenomenon. And it really does upset me when, again, people conflate kind of all of fatherhood to the actually quite small minority of men who, there are men who aren't involved in their kids' lives, but actually there are mums who aren't involved in their kids' lives.
Yeah,
so
totally.
I think the fact that we label fathers as being absent or deadbeat, it's not a helpful conversation. It is particularly not a helpful conversation for those fathers who want to be involved in their children's lives, but actually have to go through quite a few hurdles to be involved. And that can become quite demoralizing, actually, if that's how you're referred to.
Yeah, totally. It does feel like it's a trope, and that there is this minority it's legitimate. They've left, they're not supportive and so forth. But you just said, I want to rewind to what you were saying. The number one thing is just, did you say biological imperative? How important it is that fathers have an active role in their kids' lives.
It's absolutely imperative. And that comes right back to just the simple fact that we have them. Because as you said at the beginning, as a mammal, we're really rare because only 5% of mammals have investing fathers who stick around and raise their children, have some input into that. So it's a really, really rare thing to evolve. And it only evolves in those species where it's absolutely critical to offspring survival. So when it evolved 500,000 years ago, it was critical to our survival as a species. But what we now know is that not only is it critical just for basic survival, but it's fathers do something very special in terms of the developmental input they have into their children. And it's something that, yes, mums can do, but mums would have to do it in a very conscious way, whereas dads do it instinctively. It's just within their DNA that this is what they input. And those inputs are really critical to the child's development. And we know that both by, the wonderful developmental outcomes that children who have secure attachments to their fathers achieve, but also obviously by looking at those children who don't have that input into their life. And really the outcomes for those children are really quite scary, actually. So, I think it's really important that we empower men, we encourage men, we support men to be involved in their children's lives, because it is really important for those children.
Will you ground that in specifics? And let me also just throw this out. I think a lot of us, I live in Colorado Springs, where it's a big military area, right? And, so that's its own cohort. A lot of dads, you see they're kind of hard ass, like they're present, they're kind of, they care, and they're raising their kids how they were raised. So maybe kind of hard ass, kind of emotionally detached, or feel like they've got to be like, a certain kind of man that meets that alpha sort of societal expectation. So they're not deadbeat. They are plugged in, they're hands-on. And yet, I can tell you that, and I'm sure you've seen this like a million times more than the rest of us have, the well-intentioned dad who's like, you can just see how they've demoralized the shit out of especially their sons. Right? They're trying.
Obviously.
So,
yeah, there is that. But I think part of that comes down to the fact that there's so much out there written about how to be a mom and how to be an empathetic mom and how to be an emotional. There's very little written out there for men. There's very little advice which is really helpful for men out there. And I'm not saying every father does it right, but one of the reasons why I do the work I do, and I try and share the work I do, is to help men understand what they can contribute in a positive way and how they can do that. And if we don't share that, then of course they're never going to change, because nobody will tell them. And I think all parents, regardless of who you are, want the best for your children. And therefore, I think that if we can inform those sorts of men, actually, this is actually what your child needs from you. And it's not like a wholesale change of personality. We're not talking about that. In fact, I've worked with quite a few military families. And whilst on one side they do have that persona in other ways is really helpful, because one of the major inputs that fathers have in their children's development, one of the main behaviors they bring is this, what we call stimulation, pushing developmental boundaries. It's very physical. It's very opening that child open to challenge and risk and things like that, which is important for resilience building. And actually those dads tend to be really good at that. So no, not necessarily doing it perfectly, but they are still bringing something that's quite critical to that child's life. And the more we can share the knowledge we have about their importance, the more we can help men do the best that they can do.
Okay, let me just add one thing and then ask you to make a clarification. I want to make a clarification, like, I'm not over here to say my dad actually was in the Army. And so I'm not over here. I want to be really clear, like, not every dad or every person in the military is going to have that sort of strict and, sort of emotionally detached, but strict hard ass. If that came across, I didn't mean for that to come across, but there, you think military people as having a rigor and a discipline that we civilians typically don't, which is also has good things. So just wanted to clarify that. So what are the specifics? So when you think like, if I was a dad, what would be the three things that you would say, here's what I want, whether you maybe you're already doing it, but what are the two or three things that you want? And by the way, I'm a wife, a mom, a daughter. It's like, I feel like I'm intersecting with a lot of dads. What are the things that the dads you feel like are lacking, that could, or maybe lacking, that your research shows, geez, if they would just know or do these two or three things, would make a big difference in their lives and on their kids?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, many of the men I meet aren't lacking, actually. They just don't have a lot of confidence in what they are doing, because a lot of people tell them that they are dispensable, that they're not really very important, that mum can do everything. So a lot of these men, it's not that they're not doing it, it's just they don't have the confidence.
Like a social, but it's almost like a social construct.
They don't have the confidence to actually listen to their instinct and parent the way their instinct tells them to parent. And I think that's the bigger problem that men have. They don't have a lot of confidence as parents. And they quite often look at the mum as like the gold standard of parenting. And I should be parenting like this, and I should have that kind of relationship with my child. Well, actually, no, because actually kids are not supposed to have the same relationship with their mum as they do with their dad. It's supposed to be different, because then you get many different inputs. So I would say, but the three things I always say to dads, so dads who come up to me and say, particularly dads who are actually expectant fathers, they're always really worried about a few things. The first thing they're worried about is, how can I bond with my child? How can I do that? And what's the best way to do that? And what I always say, it varies through life, but like, let's say you've got young children. The best way to bond with your child is play with them. Dads are really, really good at play. They're instinctively good at it, particularly what we call rough and tumble play, which is, that really extreme kind of physical play, lots of shrieking, lots of laughing, lots of throwing around the room, wrestling, tickling, all that kind of stuff. They're really good at it, and they instinctively do it. And that is the most wonderful behavior for bonding, first of all. And it also starts teaching the child about social interaction. So it starts about the give and take of social interaction. It starts to build their resilience, because it's not the easiest form of play. It's quite risky. It's quite challenging. You might get hurt, and you have to kind of pick yourself up and dust yourself off and go, right, okay, I'm fine. And so it's starting to build resilience. So it's a really all-round amazing thing to do. When the kids are older, I always say with teenagers can be tricky for dads, because teenagers are very good at pushing their fathers away. The one thing I will say to fathers is, the most important thing to your teenager is acceptance, is to accept them as they are. Don't try to change them. Don't try to change what they're interested in. Don't try to change, what their ideas about identity or whatever it might be. Accept them. Because if a child is accepted by their father, it does a huge amount towards really good self-esteem, really good mental health. We know that it helps towards things like education. It helps towards careers. It's about that acceptance. Children want their father's acceptance. And the other thing you need to do at teenage time is spend time with your teenager. Because what's really interesting about children is they measure how important they are to their parents differently, depending on whether you're mum or dad. And how important you feel to your parents is really important to your self-esteem. And for children who are looking at their father, what's dad's thing that's generally the most lacking in capacity for him? It's his time, because usually dads go out to work. So as a dad, it's really important with your teenage children to spend time with them, because you are showing them that they are so valuable to you, that you've got this really precious commodity of time, your downtime at home when you're not at work, and I'm going to spend it with you. And so that's kind of one of the things I really say to fathers is that your presence is really important, and what you do during that time is also important. And it doesn't have to be anything amazing. It doesn't have to be that you have to spend loads of money. You can just go for a walk with walk the dog, cook a meal, wash the car, do some gaming together, whatever it is that you like or your child particularly likes. It's good that it's teenage led. Do that, because if you can give them good self-esteem, then they're already really well set up for the future.
Oh my God, Anna, you've hit such a nerve with me. My heart's beating so hard. I'm going to start to tear up. First of all, I'm going to give a big shout out to my dad, who there was so much rough and tumble play when I was growing up. Like, he nailed it, and we're really close. And so I do that with my kids. Even my boys are now teenagers. We throw down, and it is dangerous. Like, we all get hurt, and when we say sorry, and we're like, let's do it again.
Yeah, so it's so important. It's a brilliant behavior.
Yeah, no, I love that. Like, I got that so naturally growing up, and I give that to my boys, and we love it. But what you said, like, not having that time with my dad as a teenager, and how it's led to me not feeling important. Like, oh my God, I've had to do a lot of therapy to give myself that sense of importance. And I just say this, the show is called Getting Open. I mean, keeping it real. Whether you're a male or female, however you identify, I think there are a lot of us that didn't get that necessarily the amount of time. And then you talked about the acceptance. My dad is amazing, but he's a tough customer. I mean, he's self-critical, and he's tough on the rest of us, right? So I'm just like, ooh, for anybody else who's like, oh my God, that just hit me in the chest. we can give it to ourselves, but I do love these 3 points that dads raising younger children and teens. And honestly, let me actually ask you this. How do I phrase this? If let's say a dad got it wrong, and again, my dad's amazing, but let's say he was listening, and is it ever too late? Like, yeah, we don't live next to each other, I live far away, but have you found in your research that if a dad got it wrong when his kids were young and teenagers, is there a way to make it up in time?
There is a way to make it up. I mean, obviously it can be harder work when you're dealing with much older children.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I will meet people in fact, I will speak to fathers men who are becoming fathers. And quite often we will talk about their relationship with their father. And you can be 40, 50, 60 years old and you can still want your dad to validate you. You can still want that, and it can still be quite a big hole. So absolutely, it's never too late as a father to, hold your hands up even and be open and go, do you know what? I didn't parent you in the way I should have parented you, and I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. Let's start from now. And that can be hugely powerful. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then the other is interesting to me too. I've talked to a number of people, and, this was probably me in the past. I don't seek the validation anymore. I give it to myself for the most part. How often do you see people just stuck because they can't get that validation from their dads? And what do you tell them?
Exactly. Absolutely. And it really is important because we know, in fact, particularly for daughters, we know the impact of fathers on daughters is very powerful. We always talk about sons needing father figures, and absolutely true. But in a way, arguably, looking at the data we have now, I think daughters might need them more, actually. It's for daughters, the relationship they have with their dad underpins so many outcomes in their life. So things like, yes, mental health and resilience and education and career and how good they are at relationships and likelihood of, certain things like addiction and things like that. It's so incredibly powerful. And we know that daughters who have really good relationships with their dads have secure attachments, have, a father who's accepted them and is emotionally available and all those sorts of things. Their outcomes are so much better than women who don't. And so women, particularly, I think with their fathers, they do need that father to be that foundation, and that relationship with that father to be the foundation, really, of their life going forward. And I think, I'm sure you've met women who are still struggling with that relationship. And that's because it is vital. It's a vital, because if your father accepts you, one of the reasons why is we still live in a very patriarchal society. And if you have a father who says to you, I value your opinions, you can be assertive, you can be successful, all of these things, you can be whoever you want to be. That's kind of like society saying, don't listen to all that, women have to be meek and women have to be quiet and women have to be subservient to men and all that. You've got the most important male in your life starting up saying to you, you can do anything. And that's really powerful for women. And I think that's why that relationship really underpins so many outcomes for women.
Yeah, totally. I'll just add, another point in my own experience. My dad and I are really close, but I've had to give myself a lot of what he couldn't give me because he didn't get it, right? I mean, and I'm sure your data shows that. I think a lot of us are familiar with this idea of just the ripple effect generationally. And what I have found, I mean, it's like a miracle in a lot of ways. As I've done my own work and have just, with both of my parents, really accept them, forgive them, all that stuff, how that has transformed the relationship with each of them. I'm not trying to get something they can't give me. And it just totally changes the dynamic. Right. But there were many years, I'd leave my parents' house and, I would sit on the plane and feel just so sad. And so oh God, like that, it happened again. Like I just didn't feel seen. I felt like this was, so much drama. And, and so I guess my point is the good news is we can give it to ourselves. I've certainly had that. And for the parent, for the dads who are out there, to your point, in a lot of ways, it's not that hard. Although you can't give what you don't have. I mean, it becomes kind of that chicken and an egg, right? You can't give what you don't have.
Yeah. And I see it a lot. One of the first questions I always ask men who are about to become fathers is, what was your relationship like with your father? If you had a father, what were your role models, et cetera, of fatherhood? And, you get the ones, obviously, who had wonderful fathers, and that's great. But you quite often get the ones who say, well, my dad wasn't really around, or, he was very cold and distant, or he was whatever. But what's wonderful about a lot of men is they recognize that, and they will go, I am not going to be that father. I will not be that father. I will be the father I needed for my child, and I'm not going to repeat. And that's a very powerful thing, and it's a very important thing for those men that it's not repeated down the generations, and that they will be. And usually those are the men who are most invested in finding out as much as possible about what happens to them when they become fathers, what happens psychologically and biologically and all this. They really want to know, because they want to do this well, because their father wasn't the dad they needed.
Honestly, I think Mother Nature is smart in, just evolutionarily, to your point. I've been calling my boys my little Buddhas since they were babies, because they've taught me so much. Right. And I think whether we're, whatever, mother or father, if we're smart, our kids will help us grow in ways that almost no other relationship can. And to your point about like them, if you change yourself, then that generational trauma can stop with you, and it's like the greatest gift.
Yeah, it really is.
Let me ask you this: what was your relationship like with your dad?
Good. My dad died a couple of years ago, unfortunately.
Sorry.
And I miss him horribly. It was I was very close to my dad. And he was that dad who really did validate you. Anything I was interested in suddenly became his biggest enthusiasm. And he would, we would drive around the country and find things to do with it. And, and he was one of those people who would give you his time. He was very busy. He was self-employed. He ran a business, but he would make time. And we would have these really special, like, daddy and daughter days where it would just be the two of us, and we would go out and do something. And always something that I was interested in. And I still really treasure those. And I think absolutely, I got my confidence as a woman and my self-esteem as a woman from him, because he was the kind of dad who was just like, anything you think is wonderful, anything you're interested in, I think is amazing. And he did the same for my daughters. Actually, I have two daughters. And he was just the best grandfather, because the same thing, even at the age of, 80, he was still like, yeah, this is a brilliant, let's go investigate this. This is what you're interested in. Let's go do this. And yeah, he was very physical. Everything was about action. And he was an architect, but he wanted to be a builder. And so, he was always building things, and I was always his little mate, helping him build stuff and that kind of thing. So I was very lucky that I had a really, really good dad. And I really saw the benefits of that, I think.
Awesome. Good job, Papa. What led you into this work of
it's
helping?
Actually a really personal reason. So when I first became a mum 18 years ago, it was not a great birth. So I hemorrhaged and lost a lot of blood, and my daughter was born with a lung infection. And so it was very, very traumatic. And after the birth and everything, they gave me a lot of morphine. I passed out. I actually don't remember very much about it. Obviously, my husband was there and he watched it all. And when they'd patched me up and they whisked the baby off to neonatal care, they patched me up, and no one explained to him what had happened. And they just kind of left. It's the NHS, so it's always very pressurized. They all rushed off to do whatever the next thing was they had to do. And they left him in the room on his own with me, breathing really shallowly. And the cleaner came in to clean the room. And he said to the cleaner, "Do you think she's dead?" Because he couldn't hear me breathe. And the cleaner went, "Well, I don't think so, mate. I think they would have told you." And he was like, I know.
Keepers.
And then afterwards, I got offered like loads of counselling of like, "Shall we debrief you? Should we?" And I was like, "Do you know what? I'm fine, because I passed out. I don't literally remember anything." Whereas my husband, who had seen literally a slow motion car crash, got offered nothing, literally nothing. It was like he didn't exist. And that made me really, really cross, because, like a lot of parents, we'd gone into it together going, we're going to have a kid, and you go to the scans and you go to the antenatal classes and you do all that. And it's like, you're a team. It's not just the woman who's becoming a parent. And then suddenly he was just like, not important at all. He'd seen this awful thing. We don't really care. He saw this awful thing. And he was really badly emotional about it. I think he probably had PTSD. He couldn't speak about the birth for years afterwards without crying. He was really worried about us having another kid in case it happened again. And so when I went back to work, I was already working at Oxford, and I was like, I'm an anthropologist, okay? I'm going to find out what we know about fathers, because that was awful. The way he was treated was awful. And I looked in all the literature, and there was lots of stuff about, absent dads and deadbeat dads and how awful they are. But there was nothing on the vast majority of men who, whether they co-reside or not, do good stuff with their kids. Nothing. I mean, it was shocking. We didn't know anything. And so I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this study, ask some really, really basic questions, and we're going to start from there. And so we asked, do men biologically change? So do they have hormone changes? Do they have brain changes? Does their psychology change? How do they build their bond with their baby? Because obviously they don't go through pregnancy. So how do they do that? Do they have any role in child development? What do they enjoy? Just simple things. What do they enjoy doing? What do they worry about? What's their health like? All these things that nobody had ever asked. And we started from there. And, nearly 20 years later, we're still doing it. And it was brilliant. It was really empowering, because the men who we recruited were so invested in it. They really wanted to know what was going on. They were really enthusiastic, and they always have been. They've always been my easiest research groups, because they're so used to being ignored. When you walk in and go, I really want to know what's happening to you, they're like, oh, well, okay, yeah, you can ask me. We take blood from them, lots of horrible things, but they're usually really, really good. And that's why it started, because I was so horrified that this person who was so important to my daughter, who built the most amazing relationship with my daughter, was a really, really good dad, had literally been dismissed. I just thought that's awful.
That's amazing. I mean, it's like necessity is the mother of invention, right? You saw that, up front and close, and it so rings true how the dads so often are dismissed, and mothers are practically mythologized, which in a lot of ways isn't good for the moms either. Like, we need partners. And, so it's like, it really feels like evolutionarily, there should be a greater balance there. So that's amazing. Let me actually ask you this. I feel like there is, again, just in the tropes and so forth, that dads tend to be more, angry or strict or, aggressive. Does the research bear that out?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Absolutely. There's no evidence of that at all. If you look at sort of distributions of things like aggressive, violent, overt disciplinary behavior, it's pretty much the same between women and men. That is much more a product of that person's upbringing, usually, than it is what their sex is. So it's much more to do with their life experience. So absolutely not. And, we know from a biological point of view that men are as programmed and chemically and biologically primed to nurture, for example, as women are. The brain changes they go through when they become a parent for the first time are identical to those that women go through.
Oh, really? Do they have the same kind of oxytocin? Like, I think especially breastfeeding moms will have more oxytocin come out. I remember I was living in New York City at the time when I had my kids. I'd be on the subway looking at pictures of my babies, and I'd be like, oh, the oxytocin feels so good.
Yeah, no, but dads are exactly the same. So dads go through a whole raft of hormone changes. Obviously slightly different to women, but they go through a whole raft of hormone changes. They have exactly the same sort of rises in oxytocin that go on. They have exactly the same experiences in terms of, so there's a parenting hormone, for example, called prolactin, and both mums and dads see increases in prolactin. So they go through a very similar suite of hormone changes, which are there to prime them to be nurturing and empathetic and good at risk detection and good at defense of the nest, all these sorts of things. So this myth that, mums are instinctive, which, if you, as you're a mum and I'm a mum, you're like, no, we're not.
Sometimes.
This baby appears and you're supposed to know what to do with it because you've had all the hormones. So that's a myth. Dads are as instinctive as mums are. And obviously there's a steep learning curve for mums and dads. So I think that was one of the biggest myths we busted, was that men are not instinctive parents. They absolutely are. And as an evolutionary scientist, that makes perfect sense. You don't cause something to evolve, which is as rare and as important as a mammalian father, without giving that man as much of a head start as you can. And you do that by selecting for the brain changes, selecting for the hormone changes, so that he is there ready. And that's what I say to a lot of men, particularly when they are lacking in confidence, is that, and I explain that science to them. I say, do you know what? You are exactly the same as your female partner. You have changed in exactly the same way. So listen to your instinct, because your instinct is correct, because you are good at this.
I love that.
And that's usually, that's a game changer.
Yeah, no, I love that. I feel that actually in my chest. And when I just think about society, it's like, even just like some of the ads on TV, it's like how dumb dads are, and okay, we can all love a dad joke, fine. But it does feel like societally, it's like, it's kind of offensive when you think about it. You know what I mean?
It really is. I mean, you wouldn't, I always think, if you think of a mum in that circumstance, you wouldn't present a mum in an advert looking like that, but it's kind of acceptable to basically belittle fathers, essentially.
Yeah, versus what you're advocating for, and rightly so, that real empowerment. And I think moms, what's interesting to me when I think about, I can honestly say this hasn't been the case with my husband and myself, but I see it with, oh my God, so many, oh God, it just makes you want to cringe. Other couples, and this isn't to dunk on people, but it's a real observation how often a woman, a mom, is really talks down to the guy, to the dad, and I'm like, oh sister, like what are you doing? You know what I mean? And part of it is a personality thing, and if that's how they were raised, and they were the mom wore the pants. What do you do in those situations if the mom is wearing the pants and it's like the dad is kind of like, the second like not needed wheel? I mean, what do you, I don't even know what my question is. I feel like I've seen that situation so many times.
It happens.
Where the mom wears the pants and it feels like it's not good.
No, and it's actually, there's a term for that. It's called maternal gatekeeping. And
maternal
basically what it means is,
I'm learning a new term.
So basically the mom controls access to the child. And usually what we see is the father will get access to the child if, for example, he does things exactly the way the mom says it needs to be done. And her way is the right way and his way is the wrong way. Or, for whatever, unfortunately, when it gets very severe, it happens quite a lot, unfortunately, in couples who don't get on very well. So, you don't get access to the child because you've annoyed me, sort of thing. But what I say to those women is, you go from it, with empathy. I understand. So, like, for example, the mum who, if she leaves the baby with the dad, leaves like a point by point bullet point. This is what you do at this time. You must do it this way. If you don't do it this way, the baby won't come. And I say to them, look, I really understand. It's nerve-wracking to leave your baby, because you've got all those really powerful feelings and it's very nerve-wracking. And I completely accept that. I have been that mum. I've been that mum who's been really worried. But a couple of things. First of all, your husband is really good at this. This is what's happened to him. He's instinctively good at it. He has an inbuilt, desire that his baby's going to survive. So let's go with that. And secondly, it's actually really important to your baby that they get different inputs. And dads are not male mums. They're not supposed to be. They are supposed to be different. And they're supposed to change the diaper differently. They're supposed to feed the food differently because they're giving that really important holistic developmental input. So actually, mums and dads don't mirror each other. They complement each other. So actually, if you allow your husband to do it the way his instinct tells him to do it, that is such a good thing for your baby. It's the best thing for your baby. And we try to get at it that way and say, I completely understand why you're concerned, but actually, for your baby's sake, we need to allow your husband to do it his way. 50% of the time that works, 50% of the time they ignore you. But it's, I think that's what I always try to say to people is it's supposed to be only by allowing a man to do it the way he does it, are you making sure that kid gets the 360-degree developmental input.
I love that. And just, shout out to the audience, like just take stock. You know what I mean? Like so often we make these mistakes unconsciously. This isn't a show to dunk on anybody. It's really, it's to get open and see our blind spots. If you're wearing the pants, just look at that. You know what I mean? As a mom. And I think, at times, and I'll, I try to be the first to call myself out. Like at times I know I've made that. I don't wear the pants necessarily in our family, but I know at times I've been critical of how my husband's been doing things. And it's egocentric and it's emasculating. And it's like, and I'll be like, oh, what am I doing? Like, I just have to call myself out a little bit. And it's, to me, that is a great gift. It's woken me up. It's helped my, create a closer bond with my husband. It's helped my kids go like, oh, okay, this is how grown-ups course correct. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not too late, but it takes that self-awareness. But I love that.
Absolutely.
Not that I love the concept, but maternal gatekeeping. There's a lot of that, I think.
There is a lot of that, and I do understand it, and I think particularly women, when I come across mums who, for example, have maybe had a bad experience maybe with their own father or with a first husband or with a first partner, and I completely get where they're coming from. But there are a lot of really good dads out there, and there are a lot of really good men out there, and we have to let them be who they are.
Well, and it feels like it can be a vicious cycle. Like I can just hear some women saying like, oh, he's an idiot, or rolling her eyes. And it's like, well, if you say so, right? I mean, I just, when I think about like it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and let's face it, we all make mistakes. Moms make mistakes, dad makes mistakes, but it feels like, and back to the societal norm that you described, so often dads are a second-class citizen, basically. And then if you have a mom that tends to be a little more controlling, it can kind of like compound that disconnection. I love this. This is so helpful. But since I don't have hours with you, I want to make sure we get into some of your other incredible research. What is the opioid theory?
Oh, the opioid theory. Yeah. So, okay. We talk a lot about oxytocin as the love hormone. Okay. And that's how it's presented in the press. And we all know a lot about oxytocin. I'm afraid that oxytocin isn't actually the love hormone. The reason why it came out...
Wait, what?
It's not. Basically, it is if you're a little tiny furry vole. If you're a rodent, absolutely it's your hormone.
For all the voles watching the show, you're still in the good books of oxytocin.
So basically, when research into the neurochemistry of love began, they started with studying voles. And they had some monogamous voles and they had some polygamous voles, and they were trying to work out what bonded the monogamous voles together. And they found it was oxytocin. So great. And so oxytocin was presented as the love hormone. But the problem with humans is, first of all, we're a very long way from a vole. And secondly, voles live for about 6 months. And so their relationships are obviously very short. Whereas we can love somebody for decades. And unfortunately, oxytocin is just not powerful enough to do that. Oxytocin is quite a short-lived chemical. So if you hug someone and you get a hit of oxytocin, it might last 10, 15 minutes before it disappears. The other thing is, as we go through our relationships, we grow tolerant to the oxytocin that's produced. So its effects become less and less powerful. So it's not good at underpinning those decades-long relationships. The other thing about oxytocin is, unfortunately, it's only released in any real substantial amount in 2 particular circumstances. One is during childbirth and breastfeeding. Okay, it bonds women very well to their newborn babies. And secondly, during sex. It's produced during orgasm. But if you think about the relationships humans have, the vast majority of them have nothing to do with either of those categories.
Exactly.
They're platonic,
Yeah.
they're family, they're friends. And therefore, oxytocin is not very good at bonding that kind of relationship. Now, voles don't have friends, so it's not a problem. But we do. So we began at Oxford to really start trying to think about, okay, this is not adequate. And when we look at the trajectory of oxytocin release in humans, it's really important at the start of a relationship. It's very important then, but it tails off. So it's like, okay, so something's got to replace it, which is much more powerful, and which can underpin all these different sorts of relationships, the platonic ones as well. And we obviously turned to our closest relatives, who are the primates, the monkeys and the apes, because they're much closer to us than voles are. And what bonds them, because they have very long relationships and they also have platonic friendships, is a thing called beta endorphin, which is an opioid.
Okay, beta endorphins. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that is what underpins prime. So we started looking for it in humans and we found it. Basically, it is that is the hormone of love, is beta endorphin. It acts as an opiate, so it works in the same way heroin or morphine does. It's addictive. You do not grow tolerant to it, so it can underpin a relationship for decades if it needs to. It's released by lots of other behaviors apart from childbirth and sex. So, if you laugh with a friend, you release beta endorphin. If you dance, if you exercise, if you sing, you get beta endorphin. If you touch, you get beta endorphin. There are so many ways of releasing beta endorphin, which means it can underpins human relationships in all the different ways. But it also, for example, underpins massive groups of people. So if you see a cheering football crowd, for example, because they're cheering, because they're so excited, because they're laughing, they will get a massive flood of beta endorphin, which bonds them to all the other people supporting their team, for example.
Anna, you are blowing my mind right now. Like, literally, I feel like I don't think I've ever heard of beta endorphins.
No,
I've been doing this for a long freaking time. I'm like, wait, how is it that this research has just been not as prevalent?
Because it's really hard to study. So oxytocin is really easy to study. So you get a lot of studies looking at oxytocin, because we can get it in blood, we can get it in saliva. There's lots of ways unfortunately, beta endorphin doesn't cross what we call the blood-brain barrier. So the only way you know whether it's been released is either you give someone a nasty spinal tap, not very nice, or they have to go in a very expensive scanning machine, which is very expensive. It's a nuclear scan. So the research takes longer, it's much more expensive, and therefore it's not published as much, and it's not picked up as much by the press. That's the only reason that it hasn't really been spread. But oxytocin is in that cocktail for humans, absolutely it is. But in love, it takes a real background seat. It's very much whereas at the start of a relationship, absolutely, we should actually call it the hormone of attraction, because it's very important for attraction, but it's not going to be there. It
sounds like maybe the hormone of sex and yes, breastfeeding and childbirth, fine, but it sounds like it's prevalent in those early romantic stages. And then when you orgasm, is it released by both men and women? Oxytocin? Okay.
Yeah. So, absolutely, it's there at the start of relationships. I mean, it actually underpins all human relationships. So not just romantic love, any form of love. When you start like with a friend or whoever it might be, with your baby, oxytocin is there to start
like if
with.
you have a girl crush. Yeah. Like, that makes sense.
Oxytocin in your system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. Okay, but going back to beta endorphins. So when you talk about like giant crowd, like the football team, football fans all like cheering together, or like you say, dancing, exercises, touch, and so forth. How does that transmission, if you will, co-occur? I mean, is it mirror neuron? Like, I'm so out of my league. I'm just curious, like, these things are contagious, but how?
Really basic. It's got nothing to do with mirror neurons at all. It's a very basic mechanism. So what we found, it was a study that one of my colleagues at Oxford did actually with our Oxford rowing team. And if you exercise, you will get a hit of beta endorphin. That's kind of what runner's high is, that really euphoric feeling you have when you get to the gym. And what she did was she took the rowers from the Oxford University team and she made them row separately. And when they rowed separately, obviously they got a hit of beta endorphin because they'd done some exercise. But then she made them row as the full eight. And obviously you row in synchrony and you're all together. And what happened was amazing. The beta endorphin released by each of those individuals was multiplied like 100 times because they'd been doing it in a group and they'd been doing a behavior which they all shared. And so there's something going on when humans do things in groups, particularly which involves some form of exertion or singing or dancing or laughter or marching or whatever. It kind of does this uber release of beta endorphin for everyone, and it bonds them really tightly. And we've studied this phenomenon in like choirs. We've studied it in army units. So the reason why army units partly march is because it's an exercise which bonds, and it bonds.
Well, also it's bilateral. I just had I'm a big hiker. I live in Colorado, and I only just put two and two together that that in part the benefit of hiking or walking is because you're getting that bilateral stimulation. Right. So that makes,
So the reason why you can bond the whole army unit, and the reason why you march for like a ceremonial reason or whatever, and why they make people do those marching, exercises, is partly it's a bonding thing because they get such a hit of beta endorphin, it really bonds the unit really tightly. So we've studied it in lots of different circumstances. So it's the most amazing, powerful group bonding chemical as well.
Well, it just makes me even think about, like, I love going to concerts and live events.
Yeah,
like that feeling, right? And it's like, why is it so different? What is that feeling? And yes, it's amazing to be in front of an amazing band, but there's something happening biochemically, is what you're saying.
There is. So basically, you're all singing along, okay? You might even be dancing in the same way. You're getting this massive hit of beta endorphin. And because you're all doing it together, you're all suddenly feeling so much closer to each other. And so much, and it kind of gives you that euphoric feeling, because you've got the biggest hit of beta endorphin in that room. And yeah, exactly. It's why, we've done it. We've done it with we've measured people before they've gone into concerts, and we've measured them afterwards. We've done the same thing with like comedy clubs. So if you go to a comedy club, like you watch something on the telly and you laugh, and it's like, okay, that's funny. But you go to a comedy club and you laugh, and it just feels so much better because you're laughing as a room. And it's because you're in a group. And obviously we are a group living species. So the fact that this mechanism works is really important because we all have to coexist together.
Oh my gosh, it's so important. It's so important. And when I think about how, like Netflix and chill and having all your groceries delivered and all these ways that, being a social creature has been dampened. And I was just listening to somebody on, giving a lecture on kind of the future opportunities, and like live events are supposed to be really important again. And it's almost like this, the pendulum has swung so far to being addicted to our phones, very much an audience of one, to people realizing and companies realizing we need to, whether they understand it's because of the beta endorphins, they realize there is an imperative, a biological imperative to be together.
Yeah, no, we crave that contact because if you don't have it, basically what happens is your body goes into opiate withdrawal. And that's why you can feel physically like there's an absolute yearning to, like, let's say like during lockdown, okay? So when people couldn't see certain people, and we did quite a lot of research during that time, and people would say, I physically feel this ache to be with this family member or this friend or whoever it might be. And that's opiate withdrawal. So basically you've got used to being with these people, being at quite a high level of opiate, which obviously makes you feel great, you're addicted, and then suddenly you're on your own. You've just gone completely cold turkey. And that's why you can have that real visceral yearning pain when you feel that you need someone so badly. And it's just a physiological addiction, essentially. But it is very, very powerful. And as you say, that's why we will never be in a situation where humans will, just be on their own, because they cannot be on their own. We will always be drawn back, as you say, to live events or something like that, because it's too painful not to do that.
Well, that's actually good news because, again, when I think about I think there's even a book called The Comfort Crisis, right? I mean, our society has evolved in all these great ways. Amazon, forget getting something delivered tomorrow. Now you can get it today, right? You don't have to leave your house. And we've got the entire world's libraries, literally, endless amount of scrolling and videos and so forth. Like, we are so wired now, not wired, but socially and systemically to be self-sufficient, but at a giant cost, right?
Oh, enormous.
And so when I think about that, the comfort crisis, like, to me, it's like, I just don't want to go and to have small talk. Like, I just want to control everything, but we do that at our peril, like both socially as well as in every other way. I mean, like even immunologically speaking, it's like why I think cold therapy is good for people, or, heat therapy. It's like gets you out of your comfort zone. So you are immune. And I realize this is going a little bit beyond relationships, but it feels like it's all linked. It's like...
Well, it is. And talking about the immune system, beta endorphin underpins your immune system. So one of the reasons why we know that, so we now know from loads and loads of studies that the nature of your relationships that you have within your social network is the biggest factor in your mental and physical health, your longevity, and your happiness. And it's the number one. So it's bigger than exercising, eating the right vegetables, not drinking too much, being of a correct weight, all these sorts of things. It's above those. And it's so powerful. And partly that is because beta endorphin underpins your immune system. It's partly because all the wonderful neurochemistry you get when you're with somebody. So when you're with somebody, yes, you get beta endorphin, but you will get a little bit of oxytocin, you'll get a bit of dopamine, you'll get a bit of serotonin, and all of those underpin your mental health. So it's absolutely critical that you spend time with people, because as you say, otherwise it's to your detriment. It's actually to your peril. We know that people who don't have social contact, their life, we've got this obsession at the moment with living longer. Well, the number one thing you can do to live longer is spend time with people you love, that you get on with, and spend time in a room with them. That's the number one thing you do. Now, what you inject into yourself, what you eat, that's the number one.
I mean, amen. And your research goes well beyond romantic love. So will you talk, and fatherhood, of course, will you talk a little bit about, you talk about like parasocial relationships, even like deities and so forth. Will you talk about those, if you will, what might seem superfluous relationships, but I don't think they are.
Yeah, there's no, absolutely not. So I talk about religious love, and I talk about parasocial love. I will say parasocial love is a very new area of research, so we still don't know quite as much. And
what is that? Just so we're all tracking.
So parasocial love is love for a celebrity or love for like a character in a film or a book, hence the sort of the para part of it. And it's basically, in the old days, what people used to call a crush, but we don't really call it a crush anymore. We call it parasocial love. And, it's really powerful. And it certainly has, in many cases, quite a lot of benefits. So we used to think that, particularly if adults had parasocial relationships, there was something wrong with them. It was a bit weird. And actually what we found out now is actually generally these people, it's not that it replaces real relationships. They don't have some pathology going on. It's actually a really important part of their social network. And for example, particularly for adolescents, those relationships can be really important, particularly if you're sort of LGBTQ plus and you don't really maybe have many people in your community who represent that and who you can get security from. Quite often it's in those areas will, for example, form a proper attachment relationship to a parasocial relationship. So it might be a celebrity who's LGBTQ plus or a character in a book, and it really helps their development.
All the Taylor Swift fans right now are like, yes, we're totally justified.
It's fine, and it's really good for you, it's fine. And we still don't know a lot about things like the neurobiology or the neuroscience of it, so we can't definitively say that if we look at it on the scanner screen, it mimics human love as we would expect. So does it have the same set of neurochemistry? Does it have the same activations on the screen? We haven't got that far yet. But certainly you can build an attachment in a parasocial relationship. Absolutely no question. That's definitely happened. So in terms of God, I've studied mainly Christian religion. And absolutely what we see in that is that is a love relationship in the same way that you would have a love relationship for a human. Who's physically in front of you. I mean, what I find amazing about religious love is the ability to have a fully rounded love relationship in your head without ever actually meeting in terms of physical form this being. And that is astonishing. It shows the power of the human brain. But also, I haven't done this, but people have, for example, put very devout people in scanners, nuns, for example, and asked them to commune with God. And if you look on the scanner screen, the activation of the brain is exactly what you would see if they were talking to, a friend they loved, a family member they loved. You see exactly the same behavior, particularly the prefrontal cortex, which is the bit at the front of your head. That's the bit that lights up when you are interacting with another sentient being. It's very important. So, for example, if you interact with an AI, nothing. But if you interact with God, it lights up like a Christmas tree. Because it's like, this is a person, and I'm in love with this person.
Pun intended? No, pun intended. Because when I think Christ and, Jesus, right, and lighting up like a Christmas tree, it's interesting, because it does feel like for people who have that, particularly what comes to mind is a very close relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
How real that is.
Yeah. And, I spoke for my book. I interviewed quite a lot of particularly nuns, Catholic nuns, and we talked a lot about their relationships with God. And obviously, I spent years talking to people about their relationships. And there are certain things that mark relationships. For example, there's an attachment there. There is reciprocity. You have to maintain the relationship, that kind of thing. And so we went through all that and we talked about their attachments and we talked about where was the reciprocity, what were their conversations with God like, what did they get from God, what did God get from them, how they maintained the relationship with God. And it was all there. All the markers of a relationship were there. And then we see this on the scanner screen as well. And we're like, well, okay, that is a relationship. That is love. So religious love is very much on the human spectrum of love. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, let's go to another form of, I feel like, and I don't know if this is a factor with the beta endorphins, when there's infidelity and the dangers of love. You talk, considerably about the dangers of, love's shadow side, love's downside. What should we know about that? And what can people do about it?
Yeah, so all adaptations, and obviously love is an adaptation like any other, no adaptation is 100% beneficial. There's always a downside to every single one. And love is no different. Love has a darker side. And that is that we require love so much in our lives. As I stated, it's the most important thing to your health, etc. And every single fiber in your being is orientated towards finding love and keeping love, essentially. And as I said, if you don't have love, you get that real visceral yearning for it. It's like love, because love isn't an emotion. Love is a need like water or food. It's very fundamental to you. And in most cases, that's fine. But obviously, because we need it so much, it can be used to exploit us. So people can make us do things because we want their love. And they will withhold that love unless you do this thing for me. And, we all joke about it. Like, if you loved me, you'd go and, maybe a cup of coffee or something like that. We all
bring me a donut if you love me.
Yeah, exactly. But actually, obviously, because we have that visceral need, it leaves us really open. And actually, the one thing that separates human love from animal love is that we are the only species that uses love to manipulate.
Oh, interesting. Wow. So okay, I've never heard that.
Yeah. So love can be used to coerce, it can be used to abuse, it can be used to manipulate. And that does happen. And we know I've interviewed quite a lot of survivors of domestic violence and domestic abuse. And we talk quite a lot about the love in those relationships and how love is used in those relationships.
Love. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This is the thing, they see it as love. So you'll talk to them, and there's a brilliant study done once by, in fact, a group at Texas University of nurses who spoke to female survivors of domestic abuse. And they started off by saying to them, what is love? They wanted to know how they defined love. And they would go, well, love is being cared for, being nurtured, being, being empathized with, being protected, being validated, all these sorts of things that we all know that's what love should look like. And then they said, okay, so what isn't love? And they would go, well, love isn't, being scared, being frightened, being manipulated, being coerced, being abused, being, receiving violence, being controlled, all these. So again, they knew what love wasn't. And then they said to them, okay, let's talk about your relationship. And obviously their relationship was the second thing. So they would say to them, so is there love in your relationship? And they would still go, yeah. And it's this really weird contradiction. And quite often when you would speak to them about it, they would, and I've had this with people I've interviewed, they will go, well, I just feel that somewhere in there is some love, and I just need to find that love. Or they believe that their love for the person will change them, will save them. So that they definitely think there's love there, but definitely love, unfortunately, because of that dark side, we all have to be very aware of that. And we all know that. We all know this, we talk a lot about red flags and toxic relationships and that kind of thing these days. But, unfortunately, love has always been also a massive risk. And you have to be very aware of the sorts of people who do use love to, unfortunately, have, negative consequences for their partner. So it's an area that really interests me because quite often, particularly with romantic love, we don't talk about it. And we don't talk about it in the context of love. But it's using the same mechanisms. And particularly, for example, the beta endorphin addiction, it's utilizing that fact that you are actually addicted to this person. You are reliant, you have a psychological and physiological addiction to this person. So they will rely on that to manipulate you or abuse you or coerce you and make it difficult for you to leave. And I think it's something we just need to recognize. Love isn't always a wonderful, wonderful thing. Sometimes, unfortunately, it can be quite a dangerous thing. And it's just something we need to be aware of.
Yeah, for sure. And I, just going back to your reference with regard to people who are in domestic abuse situations and, who were abused as children or neglected, how what becomes normalized and connected as what you expect from a caregiver and how that ends up translating into your primary relationship. And then, just going back to fatherhood and motherhood, how if that's how you were treated as a child, then that gets normalized in your own parenting and, back to cueing that vicious cycle. In your research, what have you found if, maybe you haven't gone down this path? I mean, there's a lot in terms of attachment therapy healing and inner child work and, internal family systems. Is there a methodology, one that really stands out to help people like those people in the example at the University of Texas who are raised with, abusive situations, is there one methodology that stands out to you to heal from these kinds of relationships?
Not really. I mean, what we tend to do with people, so the reason why abuse tends to cross generations is because if you're abused as a child, or if you experience or witness abuse between your parents, for example, particularly in the first 2 years of life, that's when your brain's growing, okay? And particularly the area of the brain which is linked to social behavior and all that kind of thing. And what we tend to see in children who have experienced abuse or that kind of environment is because their brains have grown up in that environment, they haven't developed properly to be able to cope in a positive way with relationships and to be able to experience love in a positive way. So, for example, they tend to have lower levels of circulating oxytocin. They tend to have very enlarged amygdalas, which is the risk detection area of the brain. So they're constantly looking for risk.
Oh, right. Hypervigilant.
The brain, which is supposed to be very dense with neurons, which relate to, social cognitions and how to have good relationships. They tend to have much less dense grey and white matter. We actually see a thing called neuronal death. So
what do you call that?
The brain is not developed properly. And because of that, you don't actually have the brain architecture as an adult to do this, because you just don't have it. And so one of the interventions we try to do, I don't, but people who I work with who are therapeutic, we try to get those kids as early as we can, because it's much easier to intervene and actually rewire the brain when they're younger, because there are periods of sensitivity that we can do that in, than when they are adults. You can still do it when they're adults. It's just much, much harder. But it's very much about behavioral interventions, and it's about really taking people down to absolute basics of starting to try and flood their brains with that oxytocin, with that beta endorphin, with that dopamine, rather than cortisol. So there's a lot of therapy involving touch. There's a lot of interventions around that to try and help them do that. And there are lots of organizations who also work with parents who find it difficult to, for example, bond or interact with their children because of their own childhoods. And again, it's about teaching those parents, working with those parents, and then teaching those parents how to interact with their child in a beneficial way to that child, essentially. But it's very difficult work.
Yeah, well, and just even going back to some of the attachment stuff. I mean, I feel like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't say everybody that I know, but dang, I mean, not getting secure attachment growing up. I mean, how prevalent do you see that in your work? I mean, it feels like 90+% of people didn't get a secure attachment, and it's not abuse, right? But it's not, the beta endorphin thing. I can totally see how that creates that, you've got somebody who is, I have to remember the terminology, somebody who's like anxiously attached, and then somebody who is avoidant, and how it creates this messed up dynamic. And I can imagine that the beta endorphin reaction just really reinforces that, what feels like it's actually a toxic pattern or a toxic loop.
Yeah. I mean, attachment, let's talk about the UK. In the UK, about 60, it kind of varies depending on generation, but between 60 and 70% of people are secure as adults.
Oh, that high? Oh gosh, good job, Brits.
It is that high. And it'll probably be the same in the States. The anxious and avoidant attachment styles are in the minority. The other thing to say about, but yes, there are lots of people who were brought up in insecure attachment styles. I mean, I was, even though I had the most wonderful relationship with my father because of the relationship my parents had, I was actually brought up as an insecure attachment style.
Okay.
And
so is insecure kind of more of like there's secure and then insecure, and then is avoidant and anxious kind of like the worst of them, basically?
No, the insecure attachment styles are sort of the avoidant and things like the preoccupied attachment style, or the disorganized attachment style. So those are seen as insecure. So secure is up here, and then you've got these insecure other factors there. But as I said, insecure it doesn't mean it's wrong, actually, insecure. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you, because there's some people, I've met some very happy dismissing avoidant people who are perfectly happy as little islands. No problem at all. So what we have to just talk about with attachment is, are you happy where you sit, really? If you are not happy with where you sit, then you need to do the work to move, because you can move. You can do it. It's not set in stone. It might be harder or easier depending on how deep seated it is, but you can move. But yeah, most people are actually secure. I think because there's been so much noise around attachment, particularly on
Well, it's like
sort of social
deadbeat
media.
dads. We all think they're all deadbeat dads. We think everybody's insecurely attached.
A lot of people have self-diagnosed. So attachment, when we actually do attachment, it's actually quite a complicated interview at the sort of psychological diagnostic level. There's lots of these things you can fill in on TikTok and I would say they're not necessarily the best. So there's quite a lot of self-diagnosis goes on in terms of attachment. So I would say, as I say, most people are secure. Other people, there are insecure attachment styles, but it's really only if you're unhappy in it that there's a problem.
Okay. No, that's helpful. I mean, I think I'm big into benchmarking, right? And it's like when you kind of know, having a sense of what the norm is, then that self-diagnosis, you can test yourself a little bit. And sure, it may make you think twice to say, oh, well, it's just because I'm insecurely attached. Well, maybe you are, maybe you aren't. But if that's the majority, then think twice. All right. Do you have a couple more minutes to talk about monogamy and infidelity? I want to be mindful of your time.
Yeah, very, very quickly. We can do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were talking about voles. I didn't realize voles only live 6 months. And they are one of the very, very few monogamous species in the animal kingdom, if you will. Yeah. Monogamy for humans, I feel like is maybe it's not even hotly debated. I think most clinicians and most people would go, we're not meant to necessarily be monogamous, but that's the expectation. What's your take on this whole business of monogamy for
monogamy is one of those tricky things, and it comes down to us being what we call a biocultural species. So we have
biocultural species.
Yeah. So we have two drivers for our behavior. We have biological drivers and we have cultural drivers. Okay. So with monogamy, from a biological perspective, we are not a monogamous species. Okay. There is no such thing. I think I read something from somebody who studied this extensively, where there are truly monogamous species, which is one that literally mates and resides with one other opposite sex.
I think seahorses are monogamous, aren't they?
No.
Oh.
Because there's two sorts of monogamy.
Okay.
There's sexual monogamy.
Oh, okay.
And there's social monogamy. So we are not a sexually monogamous species. There is the rate of infidelity in the human species is far too high for us to be sexually monogamous. We are, though, in most societies, socially monogamous, which means from the outside, we appear to couple up, we live together, we have children together in like one household. That is social monogamy. We are a socially monogamous species. So from a biological perspective, we're not, because the rate of infidelity is too high. But from a cultural and social point of view, we are, because we have been brought up in this system of society, which is monogamy is how we should be. All our laws are about monogamy. A lot of religious laws are about monogamy. It's illegal to marry more than one person. So the legal system is set around that. And there is also lots of societal disapproval if you're not monogamous. So infidelity, the reason why people lie about it is because it's not approved by society, essentially. That's why they lie. And because we've got these two different things putting it, so we've got biology over here going, no, you're not monogamous. And you've got culture over here going, yes, you are monogamous. And quite often culture wins. So lots of people
Well, because we want to belong, because we're social creatures.
It's like, okay, you can like monogamy because that's the cultural side of you going, this is where I'm comfortable. Absolutely brilliant. I'm really happy you're happy. But with the absolute biological definition of monogamy, we are not about a monogamous species because our rate of infidelity is just too high.
What is the rate of infidelity?
It sits around sort of 40 to 50%. It's quite high.
Okay. And so when you say sexually, like literally sexually versus, you hear about emotional affairs and you hear about other forms
this is just sex.
Just sexual. Okay.
Sex. And the reason why we say there are so few biologically monogamous species in the world is even those ones that we thought were monogamous, like penguins or swans or, certain forms of monkey, unfortunately, if you watch them for long enough, they all sneak off and have sex with somebody else. And the reason why for a long time we thought they were monogamous is because they weren't watching them long enough. They weren't watching them the same way. And also we didn't have DNA testing. And now you can DNA test their offspring. Hold on one second. You two is not the parents. Only one of you is the parents. And Bob over there is the dad, you know. So, and from an evolutionary point of view, if you're just talking about biology, it's actually a really bad idea to be monogamous, because it's always a good idea to go for the best mate you can to mate with.
That's Darwinism, right? I mean,
so, you know, you might have, like, as a female, you might have the best dad here. He's brilliant, but his genes are rubbish. So I'm going to go over there and you know, mate with that really handsome one over there whose genes are amazing. And then I've got the best of both worlds. And that's why. But people always sort of say, oh, you know, this is, you know, she doesn't believe in monogamy. It's not that I don't believe in monogamy, but that's the facts, guys. But quite often, for most people, culture does win out, and that's why they're happy to be monogamous. They will sit there and be monogamous because that's where they feel comfortable, and that is absolutely fine.
But to me, it raises a major issue of 40 to 50%, which is, depending on whether it's 40 or 50, half or very close to it aren't. So they're in a what I would contend a very compromised position, right? Because society's over here saying, yeah, nah, but I mean that sex drive is strong, right? The biological drive is strong. I mean, so do you, if you could rule the world, would you say, hey, let's change the cultural norms? Or would you just say, you know what, this system's working just fine? I mean, what should people do with this data?
It's really hard, you know, because obviously I've studied polygamy and I've studied people and open relationships and lots of things like that. And on one side, you look at those and you go, they work really well because nobody lies. And quite a lot of polygamous people will go, polyamory. And they will say, you know, we're happy here because we're very, very open. We admit that we are going to love more than one person. We're going to have sex with more than one person. Everybody in that understands that. It's highly moral. We communicate all the time. We make sure nobody gets upset. And that's because, you know, actually what you guys are doing in the monogamy camp is awful because you're basically lying to someone you profess to love, and you shouldn't do that. So there is that argument. But the issue we have is several things. First of all, some people have a very strong jealousy drive, and they couldn't do that. And also, these cultural rules are really embedded. We are a cultural species, and our absolute fear as a group living species is to be excluded from the group. And that's why
moralistic.
And most people stick to the rules, because if you don't stick to the rules, there is a social repercussion for not sticking to the rules. You'll be outcast in some way. And so it's really, I think we're such a long way down the line to say, oh, everyone should just follow their biological urge. I think it would be chaos and it would be harmful. And all I can really say is you have to, in a way, look to your own decisions on this. If you think you're the kind of person who could do polyamory, could do an open relationship, okay, explore that. That's fine. You know, you go and explore that way of living. But I think there is a significant number of people who couldn't live their life like that. I know personally I couldn't. So I think really we're at that point now where it's too embedded, really, for us to have this cultural massive sea change to say, actually, it's absolutely fine to follow your biological instinct.
Well, and you kind of shared some, you know, with the beta endorphins, the fact that this is, that you don't grow tolerant to it, that it's conceivable that you are still having that kind of romantic experience years and decades in, right? I mean, versus just feeling like, oh, the oxytocin is worn off. Okay, so any comments on Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban? Since they're in the news for the breakup and all the nonsense.
Oh, I thought they were really good. It's just sad, isn't it? It's sad. I think the problem we have partly also is when we first came up with the idea of monogamy and sticking together for years, our lifespans weren't very long. You know, so you could, and particularly as a woman, you know, you didn't really get any postmenopausal life in particular. You did your breeding, you raised your kids, and then you kind of died, and that was it. And what we've got now is we've now got these really long lifespans, particularly as a woman. You could have a postmenopausal lifespan of like 20, 30, 40 years. That's a hell of a long time. And so I think what we're starting to find particularly is people kind of in a way doing their child rearing and then looking and thinking, okay, I've still got another God knows how many decades to go. Is this the person I want to do that with? And we're really seeing particularly a sea change in the divorce statistics for divorces that are instigated by women after the age of 50 has shot up. Because I think women are looking at their partner and going, you've been a great dad, but we're not in that place now where we're going to carry on having children. And actually, are you the person I want to grow old with? Are you the person I want to have those adventures with as an older person? Or, and I think maybe, that's what we're seeing. I don't want them, but it is hard. It is really hard. And I think we're going to more and more, maybe the idea of being married for life is getting challenged more and more, I think, particularly in things like the divorce statistics, particularly with the younger generation. I think they're looking at and going, wow, that's a long time. And is that something really that we want to do? So whether we will see more sort of, as I say, monogamy, but serial monogamy going on, or more,
well, serial monogamy is interesting to me, right? I mean, when you just think about, hey, maybe it's a year, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, but this idea of you get married, I think the average age of getting married for a man or one, I think a woman is 25 and a man is 27. And if you're living to 80, yeah, that's a long time, and it obviously works for some people, but with the divorce statistics as they are, and then the fidelity statistics, it challenges the model.
It really does. I mean, when all of this evolved in terms of us sticking with each other for a period of time, most people would be really lucky to, make it past 40. So it's a very different proposition than it is today, I think. And I think that's a change we will see, is that maybe that idea of being married for life might change.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, it feels like it has. I mean, especially to your point about the postmenopausal women, and I'm guessing part of it is economic, part of it is probably hormonal, right? Evolutionary to the extent, okay, great dad, but different, different in terms of a partner. All right, Dr. Anna Machin, I could talk to you for literally another hour. You've been so generous with your time. We didn't even get to the future of relationships and AI. I would love to get you back. Well, no, we went down some really, really good rabbit holes, but you're amazing. Thank you for this important research you're doing. I'm delighted to be able to share it with so many people. And I hope to get you back on Getting Open. This has been fascinating.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh. I hope you loved that episode as much as I did conducting it. Honestly, I feel like I could have talked to her for another 3 hours. As always, we are so grateful for when you like, subscribe, comment, interact with the show in any way. I can't tell you how much it helps us get Getting Open out there further and wider. So please do so. If you want to reach me, you're welcome to email me at gettingopen@yourtango.com. And we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in.